The flash of red and blue lights shattered the silence of my ranch like lightning exploding across a midnight sky. Dust floated in the headlights like drifting ghosts, and 4 men dressed as police climbed out of unmarked cruisers, badges too shiny, stance too stiff, like actors unsure of their roles. My nearest neighbor lived 6 miles away, no town in sight, no court orders on record, yet here they were at my gate, pounding like they owned the soil beneath my boots. Something in my gut twisted. This wasn't law. This was an operation. And it all began the night I discovered the HOA that didn't govern me had decided they did. Because power doesn't always come in uniforms, paperwork, or fancy titles. Sometimes it comes from one ordinary person refusing to bow. If you believe in justice, truth, and standing your ground against those who think they own you, subscribe. Stories like mine deserve to be heard. There is a kind of silence only the deep countryside understands, thick, velvety, alive with subtle sound. The hum of cicadas, the low rattle of wind through dry grass, the shifting of wood in the barn like breathing. Nights like that were my peace, my world. My property, bought fair and square outside any HOA jurisdiction. My fences built by my own hands, each post driven into earth I legally owned, lived on, and loved. Freedom wrapped this land like a quilt, until the night headlights carved through the dark like knives. The glow came slow at first, distant, something my mind tried to write off as ranchers passing through or tourists who'd taken the wrong exit. But this road dead ends into my land. No one comes here by accident. My heart started to beat quicker, not in fear, but in awareness, a predator's sense of territory challenged. I stepped onto the porch, boots heavy against the old plank. The air felt metallic, like a storm building without clouds. Then I saw them, 4 cruisers, no department markings, lights flashing like carnival lights. They rolled to a stop at my gate, dust blooming under their tires. Doors opened in perfect synchronization, like rehearsed theater. The men wore dark uniforms, badges shining under cheap LED light. But something was wrong. Their belts didn't sag with real equipment. Their posture wasn't disciplined. Their eyes darted, unfocused, like men wearing authority rather than owning it. Fake. All of them. But why here? My ranch wasn't under dispute. No taxes owed, no liens, no complaints, because there was no one close enough to complain. But 3 days earlier, a neighbor 18 miles down the valley had warned me about a newly formed HOA, private, aggressive, expanding like mold. They were buying property, absorbing landowners through intimidation, calling it community regulation. But I was outside their boundary. Unreachable. Untouchable. Or so I thought. The men approached my gate. No warrant. No announcement. One tried the latch like a burglar testing a window. A barren wind rolled across the pasture, lifting dust off the road like whispers of warning. The cattle stirred in the distance, uneasy. And then, knocking. Hard enough to rattle bone. My house lights stayed off. I wanted them to think I was asleep, unaware. I pressed into the shadow by the window and watched them through the slats. The tallest one stepped forward, hand hovering near a fake holster, posture trying to imitate authority. He leaned to the gate camera and spoke words I couldn't hear but could read from his lip. Open the gate. Compliance required. Required by who? That's when headlights appeared again, this time behind their cars. A silver SUV, clean, polished, suburban perfection. The kind you find in HOA newsletters posing beside manicured lawns. A woman stepped out, hair rigid with hairspray, clipboard held like a gavel. She didn't wear uniform. She didn't need to. The kind of person whose power was belief alone. She thought she owned the valley. She pointed toward my front door like issuing a command to troops she believed were hers. The fake cops adjusted stance, emboldened. Their confidence wasn't natural, it was borrowed from her entitlement. That's when I realized the truth. They weren't here to enforce law. They were here to enforce her. A cold sensation crawled through me, not fear, recognition. This wasn't a police situation. This was territorial invasion disguised as authority. They wanted my land, my obedience, maybe both. And they were willing to impersonate law to get it. My hand rested on the latch inside my door, not to hide, but to measure options. Calling real authorities meant time, distance, delay. But I wasn't trapped. I knew every inch of this land like the lines of my own palm. The night was on my side. Shadows were my allies. I grabbed the camera drone I kept by the pantry, powered it without sound, and sent it silently through the back window. It climbed like a moth into the dark sky, invisible to the lights below. From above, the headlights carved bright wounds across the earth. The SUV door remained open, papers visible, maps, boundary lines, printed letters with bold red stamp. HOA expansion project. Proposed acquisition target. My ranch was circled. My blood heated, slow and volcanic. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to take. The clipboard woman stepped forward, eyes sharp as steel, scanning my house like prey refusing to die. She signaled again, impatient. The fake officers moved to climb my gate. And then, the ranch lights surged on. Not from inside my house. From behind them. The motion sensors I'd set up months earlier, rarely needed, exploded into white floodlight. The whole road blazed like a stage. Their uniforms, their badges, their flimsy props, all exposed in brutal clarity. The men flinched, blinded, hands covering their faces. One stumbled, dropping his radio, plastic toy store cheap. The woman spun, realizing the trap wasn't mine, it was theirs. They weren't hunting me. I had already hunted them. The footage streamed straight to cloud storage, motion-triggered, time-stamped. Evidence. Proof. Their fake authority crumbled under the weight of truth. The woman yelled something I couldn't hear but could feel. Panic. Urgency. She waved frantically for them to retreat. But it was too late. The real sheriff's signal hit my phone. My report from earlier that week, about strange property surveying, had triggered surveillance monitoring. They had eyes on the valley tonight. Backup was already en route. The dust rose behind the imposter convoy as they scrambled to leave, but their plan was unraveling, and I wasn't done. Not even close. Because this wasn't an attack. It was the opening shot of a war. A war they would regret starting. The dust from their retreat still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave, curling through the beams of the floodlights as if documenting the crime itself. My land, usually a sanctuary of quiet dignity, now felt charged, electric, like the earth remembered footsteps that didn't belong. I watched the last set of taillights vanish into the valley's darkness, their red glow flickering like dying embers. But the tension didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, settling over the ranch with the weight of coming storms. Fake authority fleeing into the night didn't end the threat, it exposed it. And what's exposed demands reckoning. I shut off the floodlights, letting the night reclaim its natural shape. The stars reemerged slowly, blinking through the fading dust, silent witnesses to the trespass. I walked the perimeter of the property, my boots sinking into soil softened by years of quiet, soil that now held marks of unauthorized tires, footprints, and intentions. The air felt oddly still, as if the land itself was listening, waiting for my next move. Inside the house, the drone footage streamed across my screen, stark and undeniable. Close-up shots of fake badges. Unmarked cars. The HOA woman's face twisted in frustrated authority. Every frame captured the truth they thought they could bury under intimidation. I archived it all, multiple drives, cloud copies, encrypted backup. Evidence is fragile until it's everywhere. As the footage uploaded, my phone buzzed again. The same sheriff who'd received my earlier concerns had sent a short message. Monitor location. Units inbound. No sirens, no lights. Real law doesn't perform, it acts. I stepped outside again, letting the cool air settle around me. The moon had shifted, draping silver light across the cattle pens, the barn, the fence line. Everything familiar, yet somehow altered by what had just unfolded. Minutes passed, then a quiet hum drifted up the valley. A single vehicle, headlights dimmed, moved with the measured control of someone who didn't need theatric. The county sheriff's truck pulled to a stop just beyond the dust scars left by the imposter convoy. The door opened and the sheriff stepped out slowly, not with dominance but with purpose, a man who bore responsibility, not ego. He didn't approach immediately. He stood at the edge of my property, hands resting calmly at his sides, scanning the land with practiced eyes. I'd known him for years by reputation. Measured, stubbornly fair, unmovable in the face of political pressure. Which meant he already knew what tonight meant. Not just for me. For the entire valley. He walked to the gate with deliberate steps, the kind you'd expect from someone stepping into a crime scene that pretended it wasn't one. I unlocked the gate remotely, letting it slide open with a metallic groan that felt almost ceremonial. The sheriff entered, his boots brushing against gravel disturbed by the imposters. We didn't speak, not because words weren't needed, but because they would cheapen the gravity of the moment. He surveyed the tracks, the floodlight positions, the lingering dust. His gaze sharpened at the sight of the SUV's imprint in the dirt, the HOA woman's distinctive tread pattern leading the fakes like a general leading foot soldiers. Inside, I pulled up the footage, letting it play silently. His face didn't change, but his posture did, a subtle stiffening, a recognition that what we were dealing with wasn't just impersonation or trespassing. It was escalation. He leaned closer, studying each frame with the intensity of a man cataloging details he already suspected. When the footage ended, he exhaled slowly, the weight of responsibility settling into his shoulders. Without fanfare, he nodded once, an acknowledgement of both the threat and the partnership that tonight forced into existence. After he left, the ranch fell into darkness again, but not peace. The valley had awakened, stirred by forces that wanted control disguised as community. HOAs were meant to manage shared spaces, not conquer independent land. Yet this one had grown bold, too bold, believing their reach extended wherever they pointed. They wouldn't retreat quietly. People like that never do. Hours bled into dawn. The horizon glowed faintly, pale orange creeping over distant hills. Morning illuminated the aftermath. Tire grooves cutting across the road like fresh scars, footprints leading where they had no right to be, and the eerie impression of order in chaos, fake law executed with professional choreography. They'd rehearsed this. They'd planned this. They assumed compliance was automatic. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, its scent grounding me. But even that comfort felt tinged with unease. I walked out to the barn, letting the morning light reveal the details the night had blurred. My cattle milled near the fence, unsettled by last night's disturbance. Animals sense intention better than humans. Their unease confirmed mine. I rode the ATV along the property line, checking every corner. Then I saw it. The first sign that last night wasn't spontaneous. Stakes in the ground. Orange survey markers hidden behind brush. Freshly disturbed soil in straight lines, too precise to be random. They'd been here earlier. Maybe weeks. Scouting. Mapping. Planning. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a campaign. The implications churned through me like a rising tide. If they were surveying, they weren't just testing my boundaries. They intended to rewrite them. HOA expansion rarely happened through legal channels out here. This valley had always rejected external oversight. But an HOA hungry for power? They'd bypass legality entirely. They'd use fear, fraud, psychological pressure. Even impersonation. My ranch wasn't just land to them. It was leverage. Control of water access, grazing routes, roads snaking through the valley. They had circled my property on their documents because it was strategic, not because they cared about my fences or barns. I returned home with resolve crystallizing inside me. Evidence wasn't enough. I needed understanding. Origins. Motives. Allies. Information is the only shield that grows stronger the deeper you dig. When afternoon settled, the sheriff sent a single update. This is bigger than expected. Stay vigilant. We're opening a case. That confirmed everything I feared. A case meant investigation. Investigation meant patterns. Patterns meant this wasn't the first attempt, or the last. I spent the evening studying maps of the valley, overlaying the HOA's probable expansion routes. It didn't take long to see it. A corridor of influence stretching outward, creeping toward independent properties like mine. Neighbors had reported odd encounters. Unmarked cars parked near driveways, strangers taking photos of fences, letters offering integration into community governance. Integration was their word. Conquest was the truth. The sun set again, bleeding red across the horizon, as if the land itself sensed the days ahead would demand something from me. Resilience, endurance, defiance. I stepped onto the porch, watching shadows lengthen across the valley. Then, far off, barely visible, a flash. Not headlights. A reflection. Sunlight bouncing off glass. Someone was watching my ranch from the ridge. The war hadn't paused. It had only changed shape. The reflection vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the dusk as if the ridge itself pulled a curtain over whoever stood there. But I'd seen enough. A brief flash, a glint sharp and intentional. A lens. Someone watching. Someone measuring my next move before I even made it. The valley had always been a place where horizons felt endless, where distance meant privacy. Now those same distances were hiding eyes. The night tightened around the ranch like a fist. The moon climbed high, scattering silver across the pasture, illuminating the ridge just enough to taunt me with its emptiness. My instincts pulled me toward reaction, toward climbing that slope and yanking whoever stood there out of the shadows. But restraint is its own weapon. I stayed still, letting the watcher think there. Disappearance was clean, unnoticed, irrelevant. People make mistakes when they believe they haven't been seen. I reviewed the drone footage again, pausing on every frame that captured those unmarked vehicles and the HOA woman directing their movements. Her confidence had been unnerving, not because of its force, but because of its certainty. She wasn't improvising. She had come with expectation. That meant she believed the valley was already hers to govern, that resistance was a formality, not a barrier. The next morning, I headed toward the ridge through a trail only locals and deer knew. Dawn's early glow turned the valley pink, the kind of beauty that makes you forget danger for a moment. But the land remembered. Every broken twig, every scuff of dirt was a record. Halfway up the slope, I found the first sign, a footprint pressed too firmly into the soft ground. Recent. Fresh. Human. Not from ranch boots or hikers. Lighter. Flatter. City-made. By the time I reached the crest, the sun had risen fully, pushing shadows into retreat. The vantage point spread before me in a wide, sweeping arc, my ranch below, the valley stretching outward, and beyond that, the faint clusters of neighborhoods bound under the HOA's expanding reach. Whoever stood here had chosen the perfect observation point. But they'd left something behind. In the grass lay a crumpled sheet of paper, half torn by wind. I lifted it carefully. It was part of a map, a printed boundary diagram, the same style as the papers the clipboard woman carried. My ranch was marked again in bold red. This piece didn't show the whole valley, but what it did show chilled me. Arrows pointing inward, handwritten annotations circling parcels, timed projections, and a note in the corner that read, Phase 2. Acquire by any means necessary. Any means necessary. The ridge wind stung my face as I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. The valley below looked different now, not a sanctuary but contested ground. The watchers weren't operating alone. The HOA's reach was stretching with corporate precision masked under neighborly banners. They didn't want community. They wanted control. Back at the ranch, I contacted 2 landowners I trusted, old-timers who'd lived in the valley longer than any HOA could dream of existing. They knew rumors, patterns, whispers. Their voices, strained and tight, told me everything I suspected. The HOA had approached several properties with aggressive offers. When owners refused, the HOA started sending compliance notices, despite having no legal jurisdiction. They sent inspectors, surveyors, even mediators pretending to be county representatives. Now they were sending impersonated law enforcement. This wasn't neighborhood governance. It was territorial expansion. As the sun sharpened into afternoon, the sheriff arrived again. Quiet, no lights, just presence. He reviewed the ridge map piece, his jaw tightening in a way that revealed more truth than his words ever could. Without ceremony, he told me the county had received 2 additional complaints. Strange vehicles parked near private wells, HOA letters taped to gates miles outside their boundary, and residents reporting drones hovering over their properties. Control by surveillance. Control by intimidation. Control by presence. The sheriff left with the clipped map, promising deeper investigation. But law enforcement moved slowly, tethered by procedures and proof. The HOA wasn't bound by such limits. They were already steps ahead, operating in the shadows. They had resources, coordination, and someone leading the charge with the confidence of a person who never heard the word no. I spent the evening reinforcing perimeter sensors, not out of fear, but strategy. Every alert was data. Every movement was a pattern. Knowledge was the first defense against people who thrived on secrecy. By the time dusk returned, the ranch felt prepared, not fortified but aware. Then, as darkness settled, the sensors chimed. A single alert. North fence line. Movement slow, deliberate. I stepped out onto the porch, listening. The night carried faint sounds. Crickets, cattle shifting, wind dragging across brush, and something else. Footsteps? No, too quiet. Something sliding across grass. I grabbed the binoculars, adjusted the lens, and pointed toward the north boundary. There, half hidden behind a mesquite bush, a figure crouched low. Watching. Observing. Unmoving except for the slight tilt of a head adjusting its line of sight toward my house. The ridge watcher, or someone like them. Not approaching. Just studying. I didn't confront them. Not yet. If they wanted to watch, then let them. I watched back, documenting their presence, their posture, their timing. They stayed until the moon rose high, then slipped away like a shadow returning to its source. Why watch but not act? Why observe instead of trespass? Because they weren't gathering courage, they were gathering intel. This wasn't an end. It was reconnaissance. The valley slept uneasily that night, and so did I, though sleep was barely a whisper. My mind replayed the patterns, the signs, the escalation. The HOA wasn't making mistakes. They were testing defenses, probing reactions, mapping resistance. Just before dawn, as the horizon's first light brushed the land, I realized something undeniable. They weren't planning another attempt. They were planning something bigger. Coordinated. Deliberate. Imminent. And the Ridge Watcher was only the beginning. Morning arrived with a deceptive softness, the kind that tried to convince you nothing in the world was wrong. Sunlight draped the pastures in warm gold, birds skimmed low across the fence line, and the cattle grazed in slow, rhythmic patterns as though the night before hadn't been filled with watchers hiding in the dark. But the land and I shared an understanding now. Peace was just a thin frost layer covering deeper tension. One wrong step, one shift in the wind, and the truth underneath would break through. I walked the northern boundary at sunrise, following the exact route the watcher had taken. The grass bore signs of movement, blade tips bent, faint depressions where knees had rested, footprints tracing a curved path that suggested patience rather than panic. The watcher hadn't run away. They had withdrawn. A tactical retreat. I crouched where they had crouched, looking back at my house from their vantage point. The view hit me like cold water. They had marked my patterns. The lights I used most. The windows I checked. The angles I favored when scanning the property. Whoever watched me wasn't just gathering information, they were studying me. I returned to the porch as the sun climbed higher, burning off lingering fog. The sheriff's investigation might eventually uncover their names and tactics, but time wasn't on my side. The HOA's expansion plan wasn't weeks or months away, it was already unfolding. I pulled up the partial map again, studying it with fresh eyes. The handwritten notes, short, clipped phrases, revealed more than I first realized. Phase 2. Acquire by any means necessary. Perimeter evaluation in progress. Resistance expected but manageable. Manageable. A word that stripped humanity from property owners and turned them into obstacles on a checklist. I needed more information, motivation, hierarchy, command structure. HOAs don't run themselves. Someone was behind this campaign. A president, a board, a strategist. The clipboard woman was a piece, not the player. If the HOA was willing to impersonate law enforcement, then they had weight behind them. Legal teams, consultants, perhaps even investors looking to convert land into profits disguised as community development. As midday approached, I prepared to visit the only place where the HOA's operations could be understood. Their main office, located 30 miles away in a pristine neighborhood designed with geometric perfection. Homes identical, fences aligned, gardens trimmed with militaristic precision. The kind of place where rules weren't guidelines but commandments. But before leaving, I checked every sensor, every camera, every gate. The land wasn't just mine, it was my witness. I needed it to remember everything in my absence. The drive into city limits felt surreal. Mountains narrowed the highway into a corridor of rock and shadow, funneling me toward an enemy that operated under the guise of civility. When the HOA district finally appeared, it rose from the earth like an artificial oasis. Manicured bushes, decorative ponds, uniform driveways. Everything planned. Nothing natural. Their headquarters sat at the center, a glass and stone building shaped like authority. The sign outside read, Valley Heritage Community Authority, preserving quality, protecting values. The hypocrisy nearly burned my tongue. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and corporate ambition. A receptionist with a rehearsed smile greeted me, eyes scanning me with polite suspicion, a gatekeeper deciding what level of truth I deserve. I introduced myself not as a resident, but as a landowner from outside their boundary with questions regarding unsolicited outreach. The phrase, unsolicited outreach, triggered something behind her eyes. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked. She excused herself and disappeared through frosted glass doors, leaving me alone in a lobby designed to intimidate with minimalism and expense. Awards lined the walls, plaques praising growth initiatives, community expansion, and development leadership. Growth for them meant loss for others. Minutes passed before a man entered. Suit tailored, posture rigid, smile confident but hollow. He introduced himself as Mr. Alden, Director of External Relations. His title alone confirmed my suspicions. HOAs don't need external relations unless they're expanding beyond their jurisdiction. He invited me to his office, a room filled with maps, building models, zoning documents. The same valley maps I'd found on the ridge sat neatly framed on his wall, lines and boundaries drawn with clinical precision. I studied them subtly while Alden explained their vision. His words were polished, practiced. He spoke of community cohesion, long-term regional planning, and integrated governance solutions. But the phrases he avoided mattered more than the ones he used. He never once said voluntary participation. Never owner consent. Never jurisdiction limits. He described their expansion as inevitable. A natural evolution. People thrive when unified, he said, as though unity meant surrender. As though choice were optional. When I mentioned unauthorized visits to properties outside their boundaries, his demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders tightening, smile thinning, eyes sharpening. He dismissed the idea with professional amusement. Our outreach teams are well trained. They don't overstep. His confidence wasn't denial, it was control. Leaving the office, I felt the pressure of eyes from unseen corners. The HOA members moved like a hive, organized, purposeful, connected by a central mission. The clipboard woman, the fake police, the ridge watcher, they all answered to the same vision. And Alden was part of the chain pulling the strings. The drive home was a slow unraveling of what I had witnessed. The HOA wasn't improvising intimidation. They were executing a plan built on structure, funding, and confidence. Land wasn't just territory, it was currency. And my ranch was a keystone they wanted for reasons deeper than aesthetics or regulation. As I turned onto the dirt road that led home, the sun dipped low, bathing the valley in harsh orange light. That's when I saw it. A new stake, driven into the earth, right at my property line. Fresh paint, red marker, a small flag fluttering like a warning. They hadn't waited for night. They weren't hiding anymore. The attack wasn't coming. It had already begun. The small red flag flapped in the evening wind like a taunt, its thin plastic edges snapping sharply with each gust. Soft sounds, but cutting enough to stab straight through my calm. There was no mistaking its meaning. Survey flags don't appear on private land by accident. Someone had crossed my boundary, hammered this into my soil, and walked away certain I would find it. Certain it would deliver a message clearer than any written threat. We're coming, and you can't stop us. I knelt beside the stake, letting my palm rest against the disturbed earth. The ground was still soft from the intrusion, the soil pressed down in a shape that matched human boots, lightweight, similar to the ridge watcher's tracks. The stake had been driven deep, not timidly placed but claimed. Marked. A declaration of intent. The sun melted behind the horizon, painting the valley in hues of amber and blood. Shadows lengthened across the land, stretching like fingers reaching toward my ranch. The flag snapped again, sharp and provocative. They wanted me to react. They wanted fear or anger, anything that made me predictable. Instead, I stood slowly, breathing in the shifting night air. The valley wasn't theirs. Not by law. Not by right. Not by spirit. But they believed conquest was a matter of persistence, not permission. I left the flag in place for now. Evidence is strongest when untouched. As darkness took over, I walked the fence line, checking sensors and cameras. The night carried a strange weight, thicker than before. Crickets sang, but even their rhythm felt tense, unsure. Coyotes yipped in the distance, shorter calls, more cautious, as if sensing disruption in their hunting grounds. Animals know when a landscape is unsettled. They knew before people admit it. Inside the house, I reviewed the HOA office visit in my mind. Alden's poised confidence, the polished language, the rehearsed smiles, they weren't just building a community. They were running an operation. A takeover wrapped in homeowner-friendly vocabulary. Growth disguised as benefit. Control disguised as structure. But the stake, that was unmasked aggression. Late into the night, I monitored footage from the ridge, from earlier that day, from the north fence line. Patterns emerged, subtle but telling. Shadows shifting at similar hours, movements slow and deliberate, similar silhouettes appearing over multiple nights. The watchers weren't random HOA volunteers. They were organized scouts. Not military, but trained enough to move with discipline. Their patience wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. Around 2 a.m., the sensors chimed again, south fence this time. I checked the monitor. Movement, one figure. Slow. Calculated. Standing exactly at the property line. Not crossing. Not leaving. Just standing. Watching. The figure's shape was familiar. Lean, upright, the same quiet confidence the ridge watcher displayed. But tonight, something had changed. They stood in the open, not hiding, their face partially illuminated by the moon. They wanted me to see them. They wanted to be acknowledged. I stepped onto the porch, stopping at the edge of the floodlight's reach. Distance separated us, but the air between felt charged, as if the valley itself held its breath. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't threaten. They simply observed, hands relaxed at their sides, posture. The woman extended her clipboard toward the gate camera, letting the light cast across the document. I zoomed in from my monitor inside the house. What I saw explained everything. The papers weren't compliance notices. They weren't warnings. They were claims. Documents asserting jurisdiction over land not legally theirs. land outside their boundary, land they had no right to control or claim. But they had prepared the paperwork anyway, assuming intimidation would serve where legality failed. Each document had stamps, signatures, dates, fabricated authority presented as law. A knock sounded behind me, 3 short raps on wood. I turned instantly, breath-catching. The sheriff. He stood in the shadowed doorway, having approached without headlights, without fanfare. His presence was like the land itself, steady, unyielding. I stepped aside, allowing him onto the porch, the tension between silence and confrontation tightening like a rope. He studied the convoy, the flags, the woman holding falsified jurisdiction document. His jaw tightened in that familiar way. No words were exchanged between us. None were needed. He walked forward until he stood beside me, both of us facing the intruders. When the clipboard woman noticed him, her face stiffened. This wasn't part of her script. The sheriff stepped forward, stopping only inches behind the property line. His voice, when it finally cut through the night, was calm, controlled, iron-wrapped in velvet. Whatever he said was quiet, but the effect was immediate. The woman's posture faltered. Her advisors exchanged nervous glances. The men behind them tightened their grips on their clipboards. The sheriff raised a small device and photographed each vehicle, each plate, each person. His movements were slow, deliberate, legal formality functioning like a blade. The convoy grew restless, engines revving out of sync, uncertainty rippling through their previously unified formation. The sheriff issued one final statement, measured, undeniable, and pointed down the valley road. This time, the clipboard woman's authority cracked. Her mask slipped. Her fear showed. She signaled to her convoy, but not with confidence. With retreat. One by one, engines shifted from idle to motion. Vehicles turned in tight arcs, kicking up dust clouds that blurred their organized lines. The convoy pulled away, headlights disappearing one at a time until only silence remained. The sheriff didn't move until the last set of taillights vanished into the darkness. Only then did he turn, speaking in a voice that carried the weight of what came next. "This is no longer an HOA dispute," he said quietly. "This is attempted land seizure. They've stepped outside civil authority. A full case is opening, county, state, federal if needed. You're not alone in this." He didn't need to stay longer. His presence had already shifted the valley's balance. When he left, the night returned to its natural sound, wind brushing the grass, animals stirring, the slow creak of wood settling. But the land didn't feel violated anymore. It felt defended. I walked back to the red flag, the first one they planted. I pulled it from the ground with a single steady motion. The plastic stick snapped under my boot, cracking like brittle ice. Their stake was gone. Their claim was broken. Their advance was halted. The valley belonged to itself again. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the first real blow had landed, and it wasn't theirs. It was mine.